In His grace, God gave us a sequential end-time timeline that was hidden in the Psalms for thousands of years, waiting to be discovered. It has now been revealed here at the last minutes of the church age. This channel discusses end-time prophecy from the unique perspective of the encrypted timeline in the Psalms. If you want to know where we are on the timeline, please subscribe and take some time to watch the other videos on this channel. Also, please consider purchasing a copy of Encrypted, Unlocking the Timeline Revelation in the Psalms. Not only will it help you to better understand the time we're living in, but it will also be a very important book to leave behind. God bless you.
Hi and welcome. In the body shop again, and I'll have to give you a little bit of backstory because normally about, Monday, sometimes Sunday, sometimes Monday, sometimes Tuesday, I have the video finalized and edited from our Friday evening Portions and Prophecy meeting here at my shop. However, this past week on Friday, we did have the meeting, and I don't know, we had really just turned the camera on and started the actual meeting instead of just the shooting the breeze kind of part. And had a little family emergency and had to call it quits for the evening. Everything's fine. It was just, one of those things. And so we didn't get to finish. We really had just gotten started. And so there wasn't really much to be able to salvage from the video. So I thought what I would do is just give it a shot here by myself, which is going to be a little weird because I'm not used to sitting and giving a lesson to a camera. So hopefully this works out okay. I'm just going to give it a shot anyway. So I wanted to start with a little bit of current events. Since this is Monday now, September 30th, this is day 360 of the war in Israel. And so we're nearing the 1 year mark, which is kind of huge, actually. And boy, a lot has happened since my last video. Of course, we know that Nasrallah has been killed in the attack by Israel, and the Muslim world is fairly inflamed, and there are still, it seems like every week there's a call from either the Houthis or or Iran or Turkey or some nation for the Muslim nations to all rise up against Israel. And they're calling for jihad against Israel, invasion of Israel. They're basically saying that the Muslim world, it's their responsibility now to come against Israel. And the interesting thing about that is, when you think about it, it's only a matter of time, I would think, with this war continuing to escalate. It's kind of shifted from Gaza now to Hezbollah, which Hezbollah I look at kind of a parasite in Lebanon. It's apparent that Israel doesn't want a war with Lebanon. However, Hezbollah has infiltrated Lebanon. So it makes it kind of interesting, prophetically also. But so if you back up and think for a second, so there are roughly 2 billion Muslims in the world. Israel is surrounded by Muslim nations. Israel is tiny. There are a total, the numbers that I've seen in the world, this isn't in Israel, this is in the world, there are roughly 15 million Jews in the world, and maybe somewhere around 10 million actually live in Israel. And I'm not sure about that number, you'll have to fact check me on that, but I've seen different numbers. But so think about that. Even if it were 15 million in Israel compared to 2 billion, the odds are not in Israel's favor. And last week, while I was just doing some research, I came across this, it's a list of all the wars since 1948 that Israel has been in with their Arab neighbors. And I thought this was interesting. I'll post this on the screen right about here. And you will see how interesting this is, because Israel has never started a fight with any of these countries or multiples of countries, as you will see, but they have won every one of them. So then that leads me to conclude, just as the author of this little graphic concluded, who do you think is going to win this one? Well, it's going to be Israel. But I think this time it's going to be through the might of the Almighty. Okay, one more news item I wanted to mention was the Pact for the Future that was passed through the UN. I believe it was on the 22nd or 23rd of September. That brings us one more giant step closer to a one world government. I mean, every piece is really in place, I think, at this point. And it's just interesting to me. I got to looking at the history of the UN. It's all about, global peace and security. That brings me to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when they say peace and safety or peace and security, then sudden destruction comes on them. And we've probably all heard that, but I found it interesting. I got to looking at the UN logo, basically their flag, and realizing that logos, they're important to the organization. There's meaning behind everything on the logo or the flag in this case, and for any country, everything on there represents something or has meaning. And I looked up the history of it, and they had multiple meetings back in 1946, and they finally adopted what is now known as the UN logo, which you see on their flag and all of their correspondence and such, which is basically two olive branches and then a globe that's dissected into pieces in the middle of it. And so I got to thinking, well, okay, knowing that every component of it probably has a meaning, I started counting. And this may just be nothing, but I thought it was pretty interesting that if you count the olive leaves on the two branches and the blocks that the world has been dissected into, which is, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's basically 5 circles divided probably 8 times. Anyway, if you count the leaves and the blocks, you come up to 77. And of course, from the timeline, we know that Israel will be 77 when the Antichrist comes on the scene and when the tribulation period starts, which takes us to Psalm 77 and also Psalm 125. So if you're not familiar with my timeline that's in my book, well, I'll just say it right here. I have 2 new friends, not here locally. One is Luke and one is Joe or Joseph, and they are helping me to get all of my documents and timelines and the letter that I wrote on the internet. Luke already has a link established that goes to, I believe it's Google Docs. I'm not real good with all that stuff, so I really needed help, and I'm super appreciative and thankful to both of them. And that is up currently, and I'll put a link in the description below the video. And then Joe is actually building I think it's just going to be a 1-page website which will have all of the videos, the timeline graphs and charts, and the letter, studies that I've done, basically all my writings, chapter 38 also of the book, which Luke has on his list also. And so all that's happening really fast, and I'm super appreciative of the help that I've gotten on that. And I think it's important. I never really thought about having 2 different places with this information, but if you think about it, one could be taken down really quick, and hopefully the other would remain up for a little bit longer. So I think having some redundancy is probably really good, a good idea. And so we'll see, that should come together hopefully this week. But anyway, the link that I have for Luke's information, where he's put all this together, and I believe again it's in Google Docs. I'll have that in the description below, and then hopefully the next video that I do, I'll have a link to the website, which will have all of the information, including videos. So they won't just be on YouTube, they'll actually be on this website as well, from my understanding. So I'm looking very much forward to that. Well, I guess I'll just go ahead and say that will conclude the little bit of a news section at the beginning of the video, and things that are going on with the ministry. I am once again in the body shop. As you can see, the car behind me doesn't look much different because, I didn't get a whole lot done in the shop last week, and I'm starting to get a little concerned about that. I'm spending probably way too much time studying and reading and writing and praying and meditating, which I think is the most important thing right now. But at the same time, I have work to do. So I'll just say thank you. I know I say this a lot, but I'm just going to always say this. Thank you so much for your prayers, for your encouragement, for your support. Some people have helped financially, which lately has been really great because of the lack of really getting as much done as I normally would around here. I'm a little embarrassed to say that I didn't get much done on this car, and I've got 2 other projects that I'm working hands-on every week right now. I have probably, 8 or 9 projects in the shop, 3 of which I'm working on a continual basis. Others, we're waiting on parts and such, so those aren't really that big of a deal, but I do have to make progress every day. But that's a side issue. So what happened, I really thought last week I would get caught up on all my work and be able to kind of just, relax and not relax, but be happy about the progress made and everything. And then on Tuesday morning, I woke up early. It was actually early morning. I woke up hearing something that, again, I believe that the Lord woke me up to hear this, and it kind of changed my entire week. So what happened was Monday night, for those of you who haven't read my book and haven't maybe listened to some of my older videos, I go to bed every night after praying and just seeking the Lord. I go to bed every night. I used to use a tablet, and I would find audio versions of the Bible, basically just at random all night, would be books of the Bible being read. And I have that on all night. My tablet broke, actually, the one that I'd used for a few years, and I've been too tight to replace that, so I'm just using my phone right now. But anyway, so I was scrolling through which book of the Bible to start with on Monday night, and I just kept coming back to, I couldn't decide, 2 Kings or Judges or whatever, so I couldn't really decide, and then I kind of passed by, not a book of the Bible, and don't hate me for this, but I've studied it a few times, the book of Jasher. And it just kept catching my attention, and I just ended up saying, well, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start my night with the book of Jasher, which is a long book, and I think it's over 7 hours to hear the whole thing being read. So that's where I started, and I woke up, I don't know, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. It was at chapter 62, and it was the part that I had really not paid attention to before, and you just read past things when you're not really studying it. But I believe the Lord woke me up Tuesday morning really early, and I was hearing the age at which each of the patriarchs, as in the 12 sons of, well, actually wasn't all 12, because Benjamin is never listed in this, but at the age at which they each died. And what caught my attention was the fact that most of them, not all of them, but most of the ages at which they passed away actually falls within our timeline between 120 and 132, meaning 2020 and 2032. And so, of course, it was really hard for me to go back to sleep at that point. And I tossed and turned with that all night long. I woke up Tuesday morning, came to work early, and got right to work studying, and got out the Bible and started going through Genesis and piecing everything together. It was basically God gave me a clue, and he never gives me a fully formed, like, here's all this information. He usually just gives me a little clue and then expects for me to go and dig it out and figure it out. And so I have done my best over the last almost week now to do that. I had this fairly ready on Friday, but I wasn't feeling super confident about it because it just seemed too rushed, even though I spent an enormous amount of hours on it. It seemed a little rushed, and maybe that's why I ended up not really going through it, because of the little emergency that we had. So anyway, I'm going to try to do that today. There's no one here. It's just me and a camera, which is a little odd, and I am going to read through this, and I will put up the timeline that I worked on, and hopefully you can follow this. Again, there won't be, I'll be honest with you, when I'm teaching on Friday nights, I have people looking at me, and I can judge by their facial expressions if they're understanding what I'm saying or not. And this one is a little confusing. So, I'm just praying that the Lord will open up understanding, and not just for you, but also for me, because it is a little confusing. And just praying that He will put the words into my mouth that He wants. I just want Him to be honored in everything. And I don't want to do something that He's not in. And if I didn't believe that He woke me up, even though this isn't the book of the Bible, boy, does it connect. And so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions, that's a tough one, because like I say, normally the questions come from the audience, and there isn't one today. And just know that if you have questions, you're not going to be the only one, because I still have some questions. This isn't 100%. It's still kind of a work in progress. But the fact that I was prepared last week to do the Neganoth timeline and go into more detail in each of those Psalms, and I really didn't have to do any work to it last week to be prepared for Friday evening, and I could get caught up on my work because of that, then all of a sudden the Lord shined a light on this, and that just changed everything. So in my mind and in my spirit, I believe that it's important. And so I thought, even today, while I'm supposed to be working, that I would at least quickly try to put this out there, and just to be obedient. So that's what I'm going to do. So here goes. I'm going to put on my glasses. Okay. So I'm going to read this, and I may interrupt myself a few times to fill in some gaps. Whatever the Lord wants me to do is what I'm going to do. So, all right. So I titled this "Another End Time Timeline Hidden in Jacob's Heirs." We know about the timeline of human history that God encrypted in the names and order of birth of Jacob and Leah's sons and one daughter, Dinah. I've always suspected that there was more to the birth order and what Leah and also Rachel said at each of their children's births. What the mom spoke over the children at the time, mom as in moms actually, at the time of their birth became their names in Hebrew. Example would be Jacob and Leah's son Zebulun. Zebulun, this is what Leah said. She said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons." So, at this time, at the 6,000 year time period, we can expect a precious gift and to be treated with honor by our husband. That brings me to Deuteronomy 24:5, which I've talked about before, and I'm not going to dwell on that tonight. So, Leah at this time represents the church. Remember, she wasn't the one Jacob wanted. He wanted Rachel. Rachel was the one who stole the false gods from her father and hid them, just as Israel has always struggled with following after false gods. So Rachel kind of had that same problem. That's just one of the hidden messages inside the story of Jacob's offspring. Okay, remember that Leah and Jacob first had Reuben, then Simeon, then Levi, and then Judah. Then they stopped having children. Primarily, as the wife Jacob didn't really want, Leah had represented the church, as I've already mentioned. And Rachel, the wife Jacob did want, has represented Israel. But what about their substitutes? It just so happens that Rachel, meaning Israel, couldn't have children at first. She substituted her handmaiden Bilhah. Bilhah in Hebrew means trouble and humble, which is kind of weird that the name means these two very opposite sounding things. There's definitely a story in there. In one name, we can see a process from a time of trouble to being humble before the Lord, just as the Psalms indicate from Psalm 120 through Psalm 132, and also Psalm 73 through Psalm 84. That it's also important to point out that Jacob, meaning Israel, was fine with sleeping with a substitute, which I always found was interesting. He didn't seem to have any conflict with that. So, the first son born to Jacob and Rachel through the substitution of Bilhah was Dan. And it just so happens that Dan died when he was 120 years old. Psalm 120 represents the beginning of the end. And think of the number 120. You can go back to the story of Noah. There's a 120 there, and also Moses, because Moses died when he was 120 years old. I don't think any of that is a coincidence, by the way. The second son born to Jacob and Rachel through the substitution of Bilhah was Naphtali. Naphtali died when he was 132 years old. Psalm 132 represents the end of the tribulation period. If Jesus died at 32 AD, as indicated by the Essenes, then you add 2 days or 2,000 years to that, you arrive at 2032. I don't think any of this is a coincidence. When Bilhah gave birth to Dan, and if I'm saying Bilhah wrong, please forgive me. It's Bilhah, Bilhah. So when she gave birth to Dan, it wasn't what Bilhah said at the birth, it was what Rachel said. And she said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. Dan in Hebrew means to judge. As of 2020, meaning Psalm 120 in our case, it seems that judgment and also stronger birth pains have come upon this earth. But we're still not in the tribulation period yet. But we're very, very close. When Bilhah gave birth to Naphtali, which would be Rachel's second son through Bilhah, Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, meaning Leah, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. This is Genesis 30, verse 8, by the way. Naphtali in Hebrew means my struggle, my strife, or to win something through wrestling. In 2032, the wrestling match will be over for the substitute, and the real Messiah will prevail and rule this earth. So can you kind of see how these things all tie together? So in this case, Naphtali relates to 2032 at the time when this wrestling match is over with. Okay. It's important to note that Rachel did all of this because she was jealous of Leah, who had 4 children. When I say all of this, I'm talking about substituting her handmaiden so that Jacob could lie with her and have offspring. So yes, Leah had 4 children at this time, and Rachel was jealous of that. The last child that Leah had, of course we know, the 4th one at that time was Judah. Now that wasn't her last, but at that time there was a gap. So remember that according to Deuteronomy 32:21, Romans 10:19, and Romans 11:11, Israel will be provoked to jealousy by the saved Gentile church. And I still believe 100% that that is because of the rapture. I think that's when that's when the remnant will be jealous of the church who is now with the Lord and not having to go through the 70-year tribulation period. And that could be any day now. I mean, literally any day now. We've never been in a time like this before, right now. So when Rachel became jealous of her sister Leah for giving Jacob 4 sons, she went to him and complained as if it was his fault. And I'm going to read his response here. So this is from Genesis 30. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. There's that jealousy part. And said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I'll die." And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God?" Interesting. "Who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb." So the church has the real Messiah that came through the 4th son of Leah and Jacob, namely Judah. The Jews will soon accept a substitute Messiah. Those who will eventually follow Jesus, the 1/3 remnant, will wish they had escaped and accepted Jesus and therefore escaped before the trap was sprung and the tribulation period began. Okay. Dan represents the beginning of the end of the year 2020. And what I'm saying by that is he represents the beginning of the end of time, or end times, however you want to put that. And he's related to the year 2020 through his death at age 120, which of course takes us to Psalm 120. I really hope that makes sense. See, at this point I would look out, and if I saw people with bewildered looks on their faces, I would try to explain it a little further. Many believe that the tribe of Dan is a prime candidate for a or the tribe of the Antichrist. And what I'm trying to say there is that people for a long time have believed, especially because of the tribe of Dan, the things that they did that we know of biblically, that the Antichrist could certainly come from that tribe. And it makes a whole lot of sense. He is definitely a type of an Antichrist. But, I mean, we've talked about this before, that the Antichrist definitely has to also reestablish the Davidic kingdom, so then he has to actually be of the line of David as well. That doesn't mean he couldn't be both, because just as I'm half German and half English, so you see how that works. It's pretty simple. We're all mutts. So here we're going to talk about Dan's blessing from Jacob. So Jacob's blessing over Dan before Jacob died was interesting, to say the least. He said of Dan, this is in Genesis 49, he said, "Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that its rider shall fall backward." Just historically, biblically historically, Samson was one of the tribes of Dan, and he was a judge over Israel for a time period. So there's a lot to be said about Dan's prophetic blessing, and there has been a lot written about this prophetic blessing. But to me, I think it goes back to, historically, I believe, prophetically and historically, it goes back to Genesis 3:15, which of course says, "And I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." So there's some similarities in there. So I do believe that at least the Antichrist will be a type or shadow. The tribe of Dan is definitely mixed in there. But that's not what this teaching is about. Let's just say that Dan, in this case, represents the rising of the Antichrist. So I want to focus on how his blessing fits on our timeline. If Dan relates to 2020 and then into the tribulation period on our timeline, It certainly does seem to fit. Hasn't it seemed like the world has been falling backwards ever since 2020? Wasn't there a type of snake bite released on the world and then another one pushed on everyone around the globe shortly thereafter? Dan was the fifth son born to Jacob. That brings me to Psalm 5. Anytime there's a number like this, I always go to the Psalms and see if there's a correlation. So in this case, there definitely is, and I do believe in my book I wrote about Psalm 5 also. So Psalm 5, I'm not going to do the whole thing, I'm just going to do the key verses here that have to do with the Antichrist and the beast system rising. So, this starting with verse 4, "For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor shall evil dwell in you. The boastful shall not stand in your sight. You hate all workers of iniquity. You shall destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man." I believe we know who this is. Now this is verse 9. "For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is destruction. Their throat is an open tomb. They flatter with their tongue." Sorry, I gotta turn page. "Pronounce them guilty, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against you." Okay, so that's Dan and the tribe of Dan. Now we're going to go to Naphtali, which of course we know relates now to 2032 through his death at 132 years old. So Naphtali, again, is Dan's brother. Dan's brother, Naphtali, just as all of the brothers, he was also given a blessing by Jacob. His blessing never made any sense to me, but now it's starting to make sense. Naphtali, now here it is, this is from Genesis 49:21. "Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns." Now, as a man, if that was the blessing that I received, I would be thinking, okay, that's pretty weird. So, yeah, Naphtali was a man, but yet he was likened to a female deer that bears beautiful fawns. So the answer to Naphtali's blessing, I believe, is found in the Song of Solomon, which is also an encrypted timeline of the end times. Very encrypted. So I'm not going to go into all of that today for time's sake, and also to keep this kind of rated PG, because there's a lot of stuff that I don't feel comfortable talking about in the Song of Solomon. You'll have to read that for yourself. So suffice it to say that fawns, which are also likened to gazelles in the Song of Solomon, represent the remnant of Israel in the latter chapters, and quite possibly the raptured church in the earlier chapters. Naphtali was the sixth son born to Jacob. We are now here at the 6,000 year mark on the millennial timeline. I hope you can see how all this is coming together. It is a little confusing, though, I'll be honest with you. So now, of course, we went to Psalm 5 for the fifth son. Now we're going to go to Psalm 6 for the sixth son. This is also, I must say, a Neganoth psalm. So it does, we know from the Neganoth timeline that this psalm fits on the end time 7-year timeline. So, starting with verse 6, "O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your hot pleasure." Or, I'm sorry. "Nor chasten me in your hot displeasure. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are troubled. My soul also is greatly troubled." And then it says, "But you, O Lord, how long?" So there's that longing for this to end already. "Return, O Lord, deliver me." These are key themes that you'll find in the latter Psalms of Ascent and the latter Psalms of Asaph. "O save me for your mercy's sake, for in death there is no remembrance of you. In the grave, who will give you thanks? I am weary with my groaning. All night I make my bed swim. I drench my couch with my tears." This is all obviously a lament. I mean, distraught would be an understatement. So this is all about trouble and grief. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows old because of my enemies. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity, for the Lord has heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord will receive my prayer. Let all my enemies be ashamed and greatly troubled. Let them turn back and be ashamed suddenly. So yeah, those last verses that I just read definitely are very similar to the ones that lead up to the Battle of Armageddon in our timeline. So I believe that Psalm 6 represents Israel in the tribulation period, which will end with the defeat of their enemies as stated in verses 8 through 10. This will happen in 2032 according to the timeline encrypted in the Psalms. Alright, so now what I want to do is try to fill in some of the gaps. So I'll put it in again right here, but the timeline that I created so that this makes a little bit more sense visually. So now we're going to fill in some of these gaps. So not only did Dan pass away when he was 120, but also Simeon. Simeon was the second born to Jacob and Leah. He also, as I just mentioned, died at the age of 120 years old. At his birth, so now remember, we're not just talking about deaths, because there wasn't a lot said about them at their death that we know of in the Bible, in the book of Jasher, or anywhere. Who they would be is more or less related to what was spoken over them at their birth, and then the Jacob's blessing that he gave them at his death. So you can see how there's a beginning and an end in all of this, and we're in the end time, so it makes sense that we're dealing with the end of their lives as well. Let's see here. At his birth, Simeon, Leah said, "Because the Lord heard I am not loved, he gave me this son too," as in addition to. So the theme is having another one in addition to the first. That fits on our timeline in 2020 as the second one, the Antichrist, has been rising behind the scenes. Remember in John 5:43, Jesus said, "I have come in my Father's name, and you did not receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive." That's the second one we're talking about. So we have two descriptions that we can place on the timeline for the year 120. This was the second one. Now let's see. Now we're going to jump over to 2023 again. Not all of the years between 120 or 2020 and 2032 have something to place on them. As some of the children of Israel, in this case, their passing away happened outside, either later or before. For instance, we know Joseph died at 110 years old. Levi, for instance, I think I'm going to talk about Levi, but he passed away at 137 years old. So I didn't do all of that, mainly for time's sake. So, 2023, Asher died at the age of 123. Leah, at Asher's birth, now Asher's mother was Zilpah, not actually Leah, so a substitute here. Happy am I, for the daughters, keyword, will call me blessed. Now, I said that the keyword here is will, as in future tense. Here's Proverbs 31:28, which speaks of, again, this goes back to Enda's timeline, my new friend from Ireland, and in the Proverbs, that there's a timeline hidden in there as well. Proverbs 31:28, her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. So you can see how those tie together. In one case, for the daughters will call me blessed, and then in Proverbs 31, her children arise and call her blessed. So what I'm trying to say is, in one, so that marks 2023, it's future tense. They will arise and call me blessed. Now in Proverbs 31, they actually do arise and call her blessed. So I believe this points to 2023 as an important year in the progress and redemption of Israel, which will end at the birth of the millennial kingdom. I also believe that the beginning of the wars, known as the flood, mentioned in Daniel 9:26, occurred on October 7th, 2023. And I'm going to go ahead and read Daniel 9:26 through 27 because it's kind of important. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. Okay, that's Jesus. Other translations indicate that it's not that he will have nothing; it's that he wasn't. It wasn't his sin that he was put to death over. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, that's a foreshadowing of the Antichrist. The end will come like a flood. I believe the Al-Aqsa flood, as it was called, on October 7th, that's the flood. War will continue until the end. We've seen nothing but war since then, and desolations have been decreed. Decreed means that it's coming. It hasn't happened yet. That those desolations have been decreed, and that's going to be at the middle point of the tribulation period. Okay. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In other words, 7 years, 1 week. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. I just want to say that we are literally living right now in between verse 26 and 27. And if that doesn't make sense to you, go and read that. So if the flood war started on October 7th, that's the beginning of that. That's still in verse 26. The next part is he will confirm a covenant. That hasn't happened yet. I believe that's in 2025, according to the timeline in the Psalms. So we literally are in between those two points right now in prophecy. Okay, so now let's go to 2025 itself. Both Reuben, who was the son of Leah, and Gad, who was the son of Leah through Zilpah, died at the age of 125. And so let's see if that has any kind of significance or makes any sense to the timeline. That's the key thing. If none of this made any sense, I would have just said, well, I woke up and that just, there's nothing to see here. But all of this makes sense if you study it and really meditate on it. At first glance, maybe it doesn't, but it does to me at this point. Okay, so Leah at Reuben's birth. Let's see. Now remember, Reuben was actually a real son of Leah and Jacob. It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. So let's pull out what the theme is. The theme at Reuben's birth was misery and the hope of being loved by her husband. And that, to me, sounds an awful lot like the tribulation period, which will begin, according to the timeline in the Psalms, that will begin in 2025. So, already, check. Furthermore, the Hebrew meaning of the name Reuben is behold a son. Because remember, Ben, like Ben Yosef is son of Joseph, for instance, so behold a son. Anytime you see Ben, that's for son. Behold relates to seeing, actually seeing something with your eyes. So who will Israel see as their Messiah in 2025 according to the timeline? He will actually be their misery, but many won't be able to see it. He is the Antichrist. Reuben was Jacob and Leah's firstborn son. He was the eldest and the rightful heir. However, see, there's a story hidden in all of this. He was later replaced by Judah due to his sin. For people that say that sin isn't a big deal, sin is a big deal. So Jacob later said in Genesis 49, 3-4, this is Jacob's blessing to Reuben at his death, at Jacob's death. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. unstable as water. You shall not excel. This kind of switched gears really fast. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. You went up to my couch. Okay, so of Judah, who we see at 2029 on the timeline, Jacob said. Now remember, Judah replaced Reuben as the number one, even though he was number 4, which is interesting. And of course, we know what 4 means. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Remember, Judah means praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow the knee before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. Lion of the tribe of Judah. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter, that word's found in Psalm 125:3, shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. I think that's interesting too, and I haven't really been able to study that much, but there's definitely a lot hidden right in there. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. You can go to Revelation 19:15 and Isaiah 63 to see what that means. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. So, it was Reuben who also found some mandrakes for his mother. His mother being Leah. Rachel was once again jealous and wanted the mandrakes for herself. Leah traded the mandrakes with Rachel, who gave up her right to be with Jacob that night. Mandrakes also appear in the Song of Solomon. Okay, so this is Genesis 30:14 through 18. Now Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest. That's probably pretty important. I'm thinking at the middle of the tribulation period, because that's the wheat harvest would be around the Passover event. And he found some mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother, Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she, meaning Leah, said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" And Rachel said, "Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." So they did a swap. When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. Jacob had a tough life, I think. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. So out of this whole mandrake story, another son was born to Leah. Rachel wanted the mandrakes, by the way. That's like an aphrodisiac, and she wanted those so that she could bear children and, get with Jacob and all that. She was willing to give up her night with him to give it to Leah for this chance to, use the mandrakes. But instead, Leah ended up with a child based on this. So, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages, or my reward, because I have given my maid to my husband," speaking of past tense. So she called his name Issachar. God's word points out that Reuben, the firstborn, found the mandrakes in the spring, at the spring wheat harvest. I believe that points to the middle of the tribulation period, which I've already talked about. Issachar, Leah's 5th son, was the result of her giving up the mandrakes to Rachel. The name Issachar is related to a reward in Hebrew. So, what do we know about Issachar? or the sons of Issachar. 1 Chronicles 12:32. And of the children of Issachar, who were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, the heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their command. So Issachar died when he was 122 years old, and I believe that it was in 2022 when Daniel 12 began to fully be revealed. And here's what Daniel 12 says. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal up the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. That's Daniel 12:4. Here's Daniel 12:9 through 10. And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. That's now. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So we can connect that to 2022. Okay, so Leah at Gad's birth, what she said was, what good fortune. Remember that Gad was born through a substitute, Zilpah. Zilpah in Hebrew means frailty. So this is how I believe these two sons, Reuben and Gad, relate to the timeline. There will be two types of Israelites, and also I believe Gentiles as well, in the tribulation period, which should start in 2025, according to the timeline. One would be the type born to a frail substitute, which will say, what good fortune. Remember, that is also the theme of the Jews post-Gog-Magog on our timeline. They will proclaim what great things the Lord has done for them as they make their way back to Israel. This group, I'll call the Gad group, will be deceived into believing that their long-awaited Messiah has finally come. The second type of Israelite will be the one who realizes the time of Jacob's trouble, or misery in this case, has begun. They will be the repentant remnant who will hope in their husband's love to see them through this time of dread and destruction. Their husband being Jesus, Yeshua, at this time. So, I say the repentant remnant because of Reuben's backstory. He sinned against his father, who was Jacob, by sleeping with Jacob's concubine wife, Bilhah. This happened when he was 30 years old, by the way, and that's an important number. After his sin, he repented for 7 years, according to his testament. He was sick for 2 years prior to his death at the age of 125. If 125 years old, in his case, relates to the year 2025, then 125 minus 2 equals 123, which relates to 2023. So there's 2 years of sickness and what started in 2023, but a war. Okay. So I get some of this information from another non-biblical source, which is the Testament of Reuben, but I do believe that even though these things are non-biblical, they're not in the Bible, they're not in the canon. Yeah, just because they're not in the Bible, in the canon of the Bible, doesn't mean that they're not historically accurate. They are ancient books and ancient writings. So I wanted to read from the Testament of Reuben. Reuben, equating again to the year 2025. And he arose and kissed them, meaning mainly his sons, but also, I believe, his brothers at this time, the ones that were still alive. And he said while he was weeping, Hear, my children, my brethren, give ear to Reuben your father, what things I command you. And behold, I call to witness against you this day the God of heaven, that ye walk not in the ignorance of youth and fornication, wherein I ran greedily. And I defiled the bed of Jacob my father. For I tell you that he smote me with a sore plague in my loins for 7 months. And had not Jacob our father prayed for me to the Lord, surely the Lord would have destroyed me. For I was 30 years old when I did this evil in the sight of the Lord. And for 7 months I was sick, even unto death. And I repented for 7 years in the set purpose of my soul before the Lord. Wine and strong drink I drank not, and flesh entered not into my mouth. and I tasted not pleasant food, mourning over my sin, for it was great, and it shall not be done in Israel. I think all that's very important. Okay, so moving on. So now we're going to move on to the year 2029. Judah, as we know, was the fourth son born to Jacob and Leah. He died at the age of 129. According to our current timeline, it will be in the spring of 2029 when the Antichrist will declare that he is God and the abomination of desolation will occur. All of Judea has been warned to flee at that time by the line of Judah himself, Jesus, in Matthew 24. So here's Matthew 24, 15 through 21. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, going back to Daniel chapter 9, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea, okay, flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down and take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be. At Judah's birth, Leah said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Does that finally reflect the hearts of the remnant of Israel who will flee into the refuge promised by God in Revelation 12? Here's what Revelation 12:14 says. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she may fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Okay, so I believe that's in the middle of the tribulation. I believe that's what the time, times, and half time means. And that's 3.5 years, 42 months. So this would be the time when all of Israel would be basically crowded into Jerusalem, into Judea, to celebrate the Passover. I believe that's the time when this is going to happen, which would be in the spring of 2029. And all of this fits on our timeline. And also remember, on April 13th, 2029, is the date of the Apophis, the possible impact of the asteroid Apophis, which is pretty interesting if you ask me. Okay, so what about the rest? Obviously, that's not all of the 12 patriarchs. Some of them died outside of our timeline. The oldest was Levi, who died at 137 years old. Levi means joined in harmony, because at his birth Leah said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Do the 3 sons relate to the 3rd day of Hosea 6:2, which I'm going to read in case you don't know what that is. After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. So there's a 3rd day. That is the millennial kingdom. Joined in harmony, that's really interesting. Certainly sounds like the millennial kingdom to me. So, on Israel's timeline, which would be the Psalms of Asaph, which ends with Psalm 83, this may be confusing, but if you continue, if that's 2032, and then you continue, well, 2031/2032 is my best judgment. If you continue to add to get to the year 137 or 2037, you would end up at Psalm 89. So that's what I did. I looked at that. Psalm 89 is a messianic psalm that speaks of God's everlasting covenant with David. And if I had to summarize really quick this psalm in one word, it would be the word forever, which is repeated more than any other word in the psalm. In many of our translations, it appears 8 times in Psalm 89. Of course, we know that the number 8 in Hebrew is related to the letter chet or het, which has the meaning of a new beginning. There's also a connection with the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Remember that the 8th day is also a Shabbat or Sabbath according to Leviticus 23. It's called Shemini Atzeret, which we've talked about before. And it's known as the last and greatest day of the feast. It represents eternity with our Messiah, the one who gave us the living water. And that concludes my short study on the timeline that the Lord kind of pushed me towards anyway, hidden in the Patriarchs and Jacob's sons' deaths, more or less, which again relates to the end times because it was the end of their life. And now it makes sense. But, you know, I kind of had searched for this before, and I never really thought about the ages at which they had passed away. I hope that makes sense. I hope you were blessed by it. And what it does is it just gives us more information, more evidence. Again, I've said this before, until things happen, there's no proof. But I believe wholeheartedly that we have a mountain of evidence at this point that says that the rapture is more than likely within the next few days, if not maybe a few months. And the tribulation period starts in 2025. The return, Jesus' return, would be in 2031 to 32. Not setting dates. A date to me means a day and an hour, not a month or even a year. So I think that we can narrow down seasons or Moedim seasons, and we are certainly right in the middle of one right now. Depending on what calendar you're looking at. Yeah. So I hope that this was a blessing, and if you would, please like and subscribe. And it's very hot in here, and so I am going to turn the camera off now finally, and I'm going to put the fan on and try to cool it off a little bit. So thank you very much. God bless. And I'll try to do another video very soon, as I believe things are going to keep happening this week, and probably really prophetically important things are probably going to continue to happen this week. So I'll try to do a short video, and then we will do the Neganoth timeline on Friday, God willing, if we're still here. So thank you again, and take care.